So you guys should all be getting a little pop-up that says you're getting recorded, so be aware. Well, welcome everyone to our Town of Chapel Hill ARPA Rescue or American Rescue Plan training for our community partners. First, I just want to thank you guys all for being here. We really appreciate that you're interested and excited to apply for some of our ARPA funds. And I just appreciate all the work that you're doing in the community, whatever that funding might be. We see you, we love you, we really appreciate what you do in our community. As I mentioned, you are being recorded. I also asked that people hold their questions till the end. We have a lot of content to get through. We want to make sure we get through all of it. And hopefully we'll answer your questions as we go along. But if we don't, feel free to either hold it to the end or drop it in the chat. And that way we'll have a record of it. And we can go back and make sure we answer it. Or if we can't answer it today for some reason, either we run out of time or we don't have the information at our fingertips, we can go back and send out kind of a follow-up after today. So those are kind of our ground rules for today. I'm going to let my coworkers introduce themselves, but I'm Sarah Polton. I'm the one that most of you guys have been communicating with through the ARPA at Town of Chapel Hill email address. I'm a senior project manager in the town manager's office, and I'm one of your ARPA team members. So Amy, do you want to go next? You're next on my screen at least.
Yep, sure. Hi, my name is Amy Oland. I am the business management director for the town. So I manage the finance and budget operations for the organization. I have been working on ARPA since its inception, since we found out we were getting money, and have been enjoying working alongside Sarah and Shanika on this process, and I'm very excited about this opportunity for all of the organizations to be able to help really do some great things in our community. So looking forward to this conversation and what's going to be coming up in the next several months.
All right, Shanika.
Hi there, my name is Shanika Weeks. I'm the town's diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. Have not been as directly involved in this process as Amy and Sarah, but certainly have been enjoying the conversations around how do we make this an equitable process for everyone and how do we keep equity in the forefront. And so I too am excited about this process and can't wait to see the good works that are produced and the outcomes for our community.
Awesome. Thank you guys both for doing that. One quick piece of housekeeping, if you don't mind, and you can do this directly to me or you can do it to everybody if you're comfortable, but can you just drop your first name, last name, and what organization you represent? That'd be really helpful just so we know who came. I'm getting some feedback on here, so I'm going to mute those people that I can hear. So please leave yourself muted if possible. That'll just kind of make the audio as clean as we can make it. All right, so let's jump in. Here's what we're going to cover today in 2 short hours. First, we're going to give you an overview of ARPA and ARPA in Chapel Hill specifically. Then we're going to review the town ARPA application. That'll take probably between 20 and 30 minutes. Then Amy is going to give you guys kind of a rundown on what ARPA reporting looks like. It is no joke, but we're going to try to make it as easy for you as possible. And then Shanika is going to give us really probably the meat of this is going to be Shanika doing a really great job talking about performance measurement, logic models, and how all of the kind of criteria that we're going to throw at you is going to feed into the program that you're hopefully going to propose as part of this process. So that's our goal. And then we'll summarize with kind of next steps and what you can expect from the project review process. So I like to start out presentations like this with kind of definitions. So we're all on the same page. We all know what we are talking about, and we all have the same understanding of different terms. So first, ARPA, you'll hear us call it ARPA or American Rescue Plan. Though that is the same word for the federal program that enabled municipalities and tribal governments and counties with direct funds to address the negative effects of the pandemic. So that's the money that we're dealing with here. The town of Chapel Hill got about $10.67 million worth of ARPA funding directly into our bank account. We got half last year and half this year. Someone is calling me from the town and I'm a little worried that that is, I apologize, hold on one second. I just want to make sure that it's not someone trying to get into the meeting. It's not. Okay, great. My apologies there. I had a little freak out that maybe someone wasn't able to join us. Okay. All right, and let's see here. Go. There we go. You may also hear us refer to the CSLRF, which is the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. That's a bit of a mouthful, but if you see those letters tied together, that is just basically the funding that specifically came to local governments and state governments, obviously, to deal with the effects of the pandemic. Expenditure categories is another term that we may use, or ECs. These are the kind of subcategories, if you will, like the really detailed categories of where the money can go from ARPA, and we'll talk a lot more about that soon. There's also town project criteria, which is criteria for that the town council has said that they're most interested in funding. So projects, the types of project size and scope of projects that the town council is most interested in funding. Community partner, that's all of you. You are community partners, whether current or future. Those are nonprofits or other agencies that want town ARPA funds to carry out projects. Another word for you, if you are awarded this funding as a subrecipient, that's what the federal government calls any entity that receives money from a recipient, like the town, to carry out ARPA types of projects and services. And then finally, the award period, that's an internal term to the town, and that refers to about January 1st to December 31st, 2024. And that's about when you can be carrying out your services and your projects with this funding. The reason it says approximately January 1st is because we don't know exactly when each individual agency's performance agreement is going to get signed. We hope to do it as soon as possible in the late fall, early winter, but it's possible that that takes a little longer, or maybe even doesn't take as long as we think it will. But we're kind of shooting for January 1st to be when all of you can start providing your services that can be reimbursed with ARPA funds. All right, so a couple of you found this, Super Sleuths found this on our website, so I thought it'd be worth taking just a minute to explain what it is. This is what the town council has kind of liked as a general breakdown for our $10.7 million of ARPA funds. You can see there at the top, there's $1 million for community partner funding. That's most of you guys that are here, and I'll tell you why it means most in a second. 2.5 million we've decided to put aside for affordable housing and homelessness initiatives. That could be both construction of new units or other services, which I'll talk about in a second. Then you see 5 categories of town projects, things that the town would undertake and perform our own selves. Then community-based projects, and that is a kind of pilot experiment project that we're gonna launch sometime in the fall. Amy and I need to get on top of that, where the community can tell us what types of projects they want us to do. And it would be town performed projects, but decided on by the community directly. And then finally, we spent $650,000 on something called Revive, which was like small business grants and activities. So the one little asterisk you see there, the little red arrow with the little call out box, that has to do with affordable housing. We're foreseeing about a lot of that $2.5 million going towards the construction of new affordable units, but there could be that there are projects maybe submitted by some of you, for example, that are not necessarily construction of new units, but are that work towards helping someone stay in their home or making their home affordable. So that could be like utility assistance or home repairs or something of that nature. And we don't know exactly if we'll put you in the category of the 1 million community partner funding, or if we'll put you under affordable housing and homelessness initiatives. It kind of depends on what applications we get for both of those things. I will say one big asterisk is that if your agency is interested in applying for ARPA funds for affordable housing construction, so constructing new units or preserving existing units, that needs to go through the town's common funding application, which will come out at the end of July. So I've mentioned that a bunch of my emails, but I just wanted to make another note here that we are not looking for the construction of new units to go through this process. They will go through the affordable housing common funding application, which will be open later this month. If you have any questions about that, or you want to make sure you're on the mailing list, you can let me know and I'll make sure you're connected with the affordable housing team. All right, so here's a little schedule of where we've where we've been and where we are and where we're hoping to go. So you can see this process kind of started with town departments kind of submitting their thoughts. And then we also got community input on what generally the community wanted us to do with our money. We did go through in a letter of intent process, and I recognize a lot of your names from that. So I'm sure you're familiar with that. And now we're in the process of getting the actual applications from our community partners that to say, like, this is the program I really want to do, and this is what we're gonna, and this is how I'm gonna do it. Our goal is by the fall to get a list of eligible projects to our town council for discussion, and so that they can decide on projects sometime probably in October, and then we can spend the rest of the winter or the fall and winter signing your performance agreements with the chosen project owners. So that's kind of our schedule. And then, as I mentioned earlier, all of the money has to be committed by the end of 2024. All right, so let's jump into what does ARPA really want to fund? And you can define that a couple different ways. These are expenditure categories. These are kind of the big high level categories. There's actually 5 total, but I've only included the 3 here that could apply to community partners. The first one is supporting public health. And then you can see some examples: medical expenses, behavioral health care, personal protective equipment, things of that nature. The second one is address negative economic impact. So to our community, to households, workers, small businesses, affected industries in the public sector. So that's a pretty broad category that we're seeing a lot of other municipalities use a lot of their money in that category. And then finally, one that might apply to people applying through this process is water, sewer, wastewater, and broadband infrastructure. So making necessary adjustments to improve access to clean drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure, and then broadband. So from those broad categories, you can see that ARPA breaks them down into lots of actual like individual expenditure categories. So you might remember from the last slide that public health was the first one. And then within public health, they have all of these subcategories. So COVID vaccination, COVID testing, COVID contact tracing. Obviously, most of those probably don't refer to anybody in this room, but you can see some of those examples. And then you come down to mental health care, substance abuse, community violence intervention. Those are all kind of subcategories within the higher categories. And this is just a really useful way. And I will say, Amy's going to go into this in a little more depth later and how we're going to use this, this list, and the full list will be in your materials. But it's really just another way for you to think about how to determine whether your project is ARPA eligible. And then finally, from an ARPA perspective, here are the groups of people that they consider to be kind of the key ARPA, like kind of the target of this ARPA money, who they want to make sure that we're trying to help as much as possible. So low and moderate income households and communities. And there's a link to what that means here in Chapel Hill. That's a link to our page. That's also in your guide. I should say this presentation will be available on our website, but also all of these links are in the guide document, the guidance document. So I'm not hiding it from you, I promise. They also define that as households that experience unemployment or increased food or housing insecurity, households residing in qualified census tracts, and then households that qualify for certain federal benefits like Medicaid and CHIP. So that's kind of what ARPA wants you to do with the money, how they want you to target the money. The town also has our own criteria of what we would like to do with our money based on the needs of our community. And these are right from the town council and their decision and their what their desires are. So they're looking for projects that are between $50,000 and $1 million. Definitely ARPA eligible. Seems simple, but that can be a little hard to determine. And then 2 kind of categories of projects. One that's new programs that are big, bold, not your business as usual, and not just staffing or kind of your normal operations, or existing programs that had to adapt in some way, expand, adapt, change because of the COVID pandemic, and will still have expanded needs or changes during the award period. So after January 1st of next year. So those are kind of the 2 categories. And when we jump into the application right now, you will see kind of how we've asked you to talk about those a little differently. All right, so let me go and look right at the application. I'll have to stop sharing, so sorry for in advance of giving you a little bit of the runaround. All right, so if you go into our website, I know you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm just going to talk through it. There are a bunch of green buttons down the right side of the website, and one of them is just the application. That's what you're actually going to be filling out. So I'm just opening up the exact thing that anybody on this call could open anytime. It's taking its time. Give me 1 second. Oh, and now my computer's frozen. Fantastic. Here we go. It just needed a second. All right. So here's our ARPA application. Make it nice and big so you can see it. Everybody seeing that now? Perfect. Thank you for the nods. So this is the ARPA application that's up on our website. I literally opened it from the website. You're not seeing any kind of special version. You can see we have some overall suggestions here on the top. It is due July 29th. However, we need all of your questions by next Friday. The reason is definitely not because Amy and I are on a vacation the last week of the month, and we will not be here to answer your questions that week, but we wanted to make sure you had an extra week to actually put them together. So please kind of think about next Friday, July 22nd being your last day that you can answer questions, but if you need another week to kind of fine tune your application and put the finishing touches on, then you've got that time. The first part will look very similar to anybody that submitted a letter of intent. It's only changed a little bit. We've added some questions that might look familiar from our human services application. And we'll talk more about equity goals later, but that's to get at our equity goals here at the town. Yes.
Someone said that it was kind of small to read. Is there any way that you can magnify that a little bit more?
Oh, yes. Thank you for monitoring the chat for me. How's that?
How's that, Karen?
I'm gonna go with better. It's the whole screen for me now, so it looks huge. So let me know if that's not good. Thank you for raising your hand.
It's definitely better.
Perfect. Thank you for letting me know. So this hasn't changed. So oddly enough, not everybody filled in a project name for their letter of intent. It'd be really helpful for us to have some kind of name for your project or service. So please make sure you do that. Another note, so if it's a short answer that we're looking for, a couple words, a number, a yes or a no, you're just going to see a line. If we're looking for more detail in your answer, I've given you a whole box. So since this is in Word, you can type in here as much as you want. You can use paragraphs and type even more. So just a quick note on how to fill out this box, but you should be able to just click in the box and write as much as you want. None of them are character limited. So obviously the next question, please describe your project in detail. And Shanika's got a great graphic that's going to show you what we're looking for here later. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but this is really important. Obviously, this is your time to tell us about your project. Then you get a little bit of a choose your own adventure book, if you remember those from when you were kids. So if you are proposing a new project that you either haven't done before, you haven't done in Orange County before, you haven't done in Chapel Hill before, it's going to be a new thing you've never done here for Chapel Hill community members. Section 2 is for you and for you only. So just new programs. You need to first confirm that you can finish your program, or at least the thing you want us to fund, by December 31st of 2024. You need to tell us how many people you expect to serve with your program, either individuals or households, and whether that's week, month, or year. And then if you're considering applying or have already applied to other places for funding for that program. Then, if you are a nonprofit that has a program that had to expand or adapt or change or grow in some way because of COVID, and you want to apply for funds for that change, adaptation, growth, you're going to fill out section 3. So I've given you some examples here, and I say I've given you, but I really got these from other people and they were really helpful in helping me think through this. So if you have to restart a program that ended during COVID because you couldn't provide it for some reason, if you have to purchase equipment or supplies to continue providing your program during COVID, or if you have to serve more community members because of COVID, those are all examples of types of projects we're looking for in this category. You know, you've done the service before in the past, but it had to change in some way, or maybe it had to stop and it has to restart now. What's really, really important to note here is that you can only ask the town for funding for expenses that you were incur in the award period. So say in 2020, you had to buy a projector and a bunch of plexiglass to somehow make your program accessible during the COVID. You cannot ask the town to reimburse you for that when you get ARPA funds. It has to be expenses that you're going to incur during the award period. Amy, am I saying that right? Would you make any changes to that statement?
That's correct.
So I just want to make that super, super clear, that anything that you want to spend money on with ARPA funds has to occur after your performance agreement is signed with the town. Next question, and I'm sure we'll have questions about that and we'll answer them when we get there. So And I've asked the same question I asked above. Do you already receive funding from other organizations for that service or program? I just realized that my little face is up there. I'm going to move that so you don't have to look at me. Or look at me twice rather. So everybody has to then complete the rest of the application. That's the only little split that you're gonna encounter on this application. Otherwise, everything you have to fill in for your organization. So your total funding request seems silly, but we really need to know that up front, like how much you're asking for. And then a project budget, pretty straightforward. We're not looking for every pencil and pen, but generally, what are your expense categories and what are you hoping to spend money on? These next two questions have to do with earning program income. So for example, if you're selling zucchinis as part of your program, or there's some kind of rental fee that you would charge people that are going to benefit your program, that requires quite a bit of other reporting. It doesn't mean that we're not going to select your project for some reason. It's just something that we'd like to be aware of, and that we might need to factor into your service once we get there. So these two questions are specifically around, are you planning to charge any kind of fees or earn income? And then the next question is, do you have any kind of sliding scale based on household income for the cost of whatever people have to pay to consume your service? All right, so next is asking you to tell us which category of ARPA funding you think your project fits into. These are the same three categories you just saw on a slide. So support public health, address negative impact and negative economic impact, and then invest in water, stormwater, or broadband. So following this, and I won't get into too much detail because this is really something that Shanika excels at, and I know she'll talk about a little later, is how do you define the people that you're serving and how they are most impacted by COVID. So we've given you kind of three ways to think about it, and you could select multiple ones of these. You can kind of select all that apply. But ARPA thinks of them one way. The Orange County Long-Term Recovery Plan thinks of them another way. And then the Reimagining Community Safety Task Force thinks about them a third way. So we've given you lots of ways to tell us, like, we're helping these types of people and these types of people, so that that'll just kind of help build your case that you are really targeting people with your program that were most affected by the pandemic. Okay, moving on, sorry, take a deep breath. Next is just talking about collaborations, and are you already working with other partners, or do you plan to work with other partners? One thing we heard from our town council is they would really like to see collaboration and multiple community partners coming together to work on a big problem if possible. What challenge, problem, or gap in your community does your service or program address? So what problem are you seeing? Is it food insecurity? Is it a learning gap? You know, what are those problems? And again, Shanika will go into more detail. She's definitely the expert. And then what disparities will the project decrease, or equity outcomes will it increase? And then we asking a little bit about how your organization has incorporated racial equity goals into kind of your organization goals. Similarly, describe any additional activities or organization to address racial equity. Very, very important to us. All of these are really important to us, but 10 is very important to us, especially it'll actually be on your scorecard, your overall scorecard, which is how are you connected to the people that you're serving? Are you geographically located among the community that you're serving? Are you philosophically connected to them? Do you have maybe previous recipients of your program that serve in your organization or are on your board, for example? So how are you connected to those people that you're serving? And then what experience, if any, do you have applying for federal grants? I want to make a note here that if the answer is 0 experience, that is okay. That will not preclude you from applying, but just want to kind of get an idea of if our applicants have any experience with that. And then we talk about performance measurements, which is a personal passion of mine and definitely Shanika's as well. So we will talk about that in more depth in a minute, but we ask you to report your inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes. And then do you go through a routine financial audit? Would be really helpful for us to know up front as well. And then the rest of the application is just disclosures. Is anybody on your board, you, a close friend or family member, fit any of these categories? Employees of the town of Chapel Hill, etc. And then sign off and we are good to go on your application. I see a bunch of chats. Oh, talk a little slower. Yes, I will. Sorry, I got a direct chat to speak slower. I will do my best. And Shanika and Amy are definitely better than I am at speaking slower. Any other questions around the app or things that you would change, Amy or Shanika, about the application before we move on? Okay, great. I am going to admit this last person, stop sharing. And Amy, do you want me to just pull up your slides and keep moving?
That'd be great.
Okay, great. All right.
Okay, great. So we wanted to take just a few minutes to very high level cover information tied to what expectations will be around reporting. I think Sarah mentioned earlier, ARPA, I mean, any federal grant has reporting that's tied to it. ARPA has very specific reporting that's tied to it. And so it's a little bit overwhelming, or can be overwhelming, but we've really done everything that we can to try and make it as easy as possible to follow. And so we're going to walk you through some information that if you are awarded, we will need to collect from your organization, because the town is required to do quarterly reporting. And because you would be a subrecipient of the town, we will have to report on the programs and projects that you all are carrying out. So we just wanted to have this high-level conversation to give you insight into what we would be needing, and just so that there was full transparency about what the expectations would look like, so you would know that going in. So if your project has been funded, what would be next? So before the project actually begins, the first thing Sarah mentioned earlier is that we would need to sign and execute a performance agreement between your organization and the town. So we have a standard template that we'll be putting out or is out on the website as a sample of what we have used for some of our other performance agreements for federal funding. And we'll really be using that as a model, just to give you a sense of what that looks like. And really, it just sets out the expectations between the two agencies and would spell out the award amount and what you would be doing for the town for the amount of money that you'd been awarded. In order to have you set up as a vendor for the town so that we could provide reimbursement to you all for expenditures that you would be incurring for your programs or projects, we would need you to fill out a vendor application. It's pretty simple. It just tells us a little bit about your organization and a W-9. That's just a federal form that we have to have completed for anyone that we pay more than $600. That's stated and mandated by the IRS. And so in order to get you in our system, those are the two things we would need. And usually those accompany a performance agreement. All of that information is on our website. If you want to take a look, you can search and just see what that would look like. And then what we would be asking for you is to complete the initial project reporting template. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. There's some information that we're going to need on your project before you actually start any work. And that's information that we have to report out about what the project is, the name, the type of expenditure, category, and just some general information about you as an organization so that we can report that to the Treasury as part of our quarterly reporting. And then once your project has started and you're going to be looking for reimbursement for the town, we are asking that on a quarterly basis. That's how we typically do any kind of reimbursement. Some are semi-annual, but we were thinking that, we're kind of talking about larger dollars here. And so we wanted to give organizations the opportunity to request reimbursement on a quarterly basis. And that would be after the quarter end. We operate on a fiscal year. So our fiscal year starts in July. So we would be looking for quarterly reimbursements to be submitted by July 15th, and that would be for April to June, October 15th from July 1st to December 30th, January 15th for October 1st to December 31st, and then April 15th for activity from January 1st through March 31st. And what we'll be looking for in that time is the quarterly project reporting template. I'll talk about that in a minute too. That is really very high level. What did you accomplish this quarter? And then the reimbursement request. And that is something that we would ask to put together. And we'll talk about that in a second, really with just an invoice and the supporting documentation of what you have been using the dollars for. So next slide. So this is just a visual, probably very small, and this will be put out on our website. So the same where Sarah mentioned, we have ARPA page where you can look and get the application and the resource guide that will walk you through filling out the application. But we also have a bunch of other related documents, and we'll be putting these templates out there for your perusal, just so you have an understanding of what we as an organization are required to submit. We put together a Word document that kind of summarizes each of these fields to try and better explain what that would look like. So I am going to try to share that because that's really what I'd like to walk the group through. So let's see if I can do this. Okay, can everyone see this screen? Okay, and can everyone read this screen? I tried
You can
to
bump it
blow
up a tick, that'd be great, but it looks
Look at
okay on my laptop. Thanks.
Hello. Yes,
okay.
hello.
Okay, so put this together just to try and summarize what information we're going to need from you all as an organization. So basically, what we'll be looking for on the front end is just some very brief information about your project. So tell us the name of your project. That's what we're going to use to identify your particular project. The expenditure category. So this is what Sarah was mentioning earlier, and as a resource, we have the entire listing here by category, so public health and what that looks like, and all the subcategories. So for example, if you're providing household assistance and food programs, your expenditure category would be negative economic impact. So your program is trying to address negative economic impacts. And your subcategory would be 2.1 household assistance food programs. And that's just information that the federal government, the Treasury, is trying to collect to figure out how people are spending these dollars. This is really important. And, Shanika is going to talk a little bit more about this, but in terms of, there's going to be a lot of performance-based information that we're going to be looking to collect, but that the Treasury is really looking to collect to be able to report out and share, how successful were organizations in spending this money and really trying to target the impacts of the pandemic. So then we're just going to be looking for a project description that can really come directly from your application. Just tell us about what the goal of your project is. We're looking for justification of how you believe, and this is on your application, how do you believe that your project addresses the negative impacts from the pandemic? Then there's state statute justification that we will help you complete. That's really just saying, how do we as a town statutorily, how are we able to reimburse you for these monies? So that's something we'll take care of. And then a lot of this information is really just coming right off your application. How much ARPA funds have you been awarded for your project? What other funds do you have to use toward your project? And what's your total project budget? And then there's some project specific information that's trying to address some of these areas that we've talked about in what demographics are we reaching for these projects. So is it serving an economically disadvantaged community? Have you documented what communities are being served? Because we're really going to be coming back and asking how you're going to be able to report out on this. And so this is information that we're really looking to find out from you in advance, that you've kind of thought through this and will be able to report on that information. So this is kind of key. So Sarah talked about, we are the recipient of the ARPA dollars, and you all would be our subrecipient because you're going to be carrying out a program through the town on behalf of the town, basically. Well, there could be a situation where you also are paying another organization to carry out a portion of this program. So will you have any subawards? So if you have any subawards, we're going to need some additional information for any subaward over $50,000, because we're basically going to have to get that data on the organization, the same information you provided to us about yourself. We're going to have to collect that information on your subrecipients. So just something to think about if you won't be carrying out this project completely under your organization. Then there's just some information, some standard questions. This is stated in our contract, so it's just documenting that you agree to this statement. And really then there's just a few other questions that are very specifically tied to certain expenditure categories that we have to report out. So for example, I was talking about the household assistance and the food program, that's 2.1. So if your expenditure category and subaward is 2.1, then we need these additional questions to be answered. And so those are kind of spelled out here. And this is all just straight from the templates. And then on a quarterly basis, there's a little bit of additional information. So back to just tell us your project name. We're going to need to know how far you've come with your project. So are you just starting? You haven't started? Are you have completed less than 50%, 50% or more, or completed? And then we're just going to be looking for some expenditure data. So where we talk about an obligation versus an expenditure, an obligation is really where you just have a contract with someone for some work. So you haven't spent the money, but you've legally obligated the dollars, or have you actually spent the money? So if you've just obligated the dollars, this is where you'll be reporting that, how much this quarter and how much in total since the beginning of your period of performance. And same thing for the expenditures. How much did you actually spend this quarter? How much did you actually write a check for versus the total from the beginning of the project? And then again, as I mentioned, if you have anyone that you are going to be subawarding the 50,000, this is the additional information. So we've tried to spell it out here. So you have this to look at. So you have an opportunity to think through this while you're applying. So you have an opportunity to ask us questions if you have questions about this. I know we have our training today. We're trying to walk through at a high level. We will have some office hours to answer your questions in advance as you're kind of thinking through all of this. But of course, we're also available as a resource anytime if you have questions throughout the process. We're here to help you succeed in carrying out your project because that's going to reflect on, the town's success. So we've tried to kind of think through some of the things that might come up and just kind of wanted to briefly walk through what the requirements are going to be from directly stated from ARPA and the Treasury. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And Sarah, would you mind going back to the presentation? I have one final slide.
One second. Sorry, I've got about a million windows open at the moment. Make sure we have everything for you. Here we go.
Yes, perfect. Okay. So as we mentioned, on the quarterly basis, what we're going to be looking for, and Shanika is going to talk a little bit more in a little bit about the project performance measures and the project accountability. We are going to be looking for information from you all about what you're hoping to accomplish with your project and how you're going to measure those outcomes. And that's going to be information that we're going to be looking for to be reported on a quarterly basis. And then tied to that is your request for reimbursement. So we'll come up with some kind of templates for an invoice so that you can send to us. So it'll have all the information that we require in order to be able to reimburse you. So basically, we'll just need information that summarizes all the expenditures that you've incurred during that reporting period that you're looking to seek reimbursement for. And supporting documentation is really, anything from receipts, if there's salary, to timesheets, to credit card statements, invoices, things like that. Anything that you have that would tie back to what you've spent the money for, so that we can have the documentation we need to make sure that we can report on it ourselves. And we have an audit that we have to go through every year, and so we need to make sure that we have good, solid documentation to support any dollars that we pay in general, but certainly when there's federal and state grant monies, it's even more important that we have good, solid documentation. So we'll have some examples, as we get closer to actually awarding dollars and having the need to put more information out there for you all. We'll be working on having samples of documents to be able to have out on the website for you if there's any questions. But this is kind of just generally speaking, the types of things that we're going to need to be able to receive from you all to make sure that we can report on what we need to submit and make sure that we can get the dollars back in your hands for the projects that y'all will be carrying out for us. So that is all I have. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Amy. I'm gonna go ahead. And so our next section is going to be measuring performance and equity. And that is the lovely Miss Shanika, who is an expert. Shanika, just let me know when you're ready to change slides.
Okay, sounds good. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, wanted to start just centering equity in this conversation because equity is so heavily centered in this process, right? So a couple of assumptions. In around August 2020, the town of Chapel Hill, along with other jurisdictions within Orange County, decided they would join the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, which gives us some guidance and a framework from which we developed the One Orange racial equity framework, and that we really wanted to scaffold this process upon, right? And so we'll just start with a couple of those. One, race matters, right? We know too that institutions rely upon processes and procedures that can perpetuate inequities. We know that we are all a part of institutions, right, and systems, and that we all have a responsibility for advancing racial equity. And so these things way prominent and heavy in this process. And so we wanted to give you what those equity assumptions are based on the guidance and the framework from which we were building this work, not only with ARPA, but with everything. If you've heard our town manager speak, he wants this to be a part of the fiber of our organization, and we're working towards that. Not there yet, but we're working towards it, right? So a couple of things to the right of that screen, you'll see we're asking about the percentage of staff that are Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC, right? So we're wanting to know if you're doing this work, are folks represented in your leadership, right? Are you asking those questions? Are you building those relationships with folks? The other piece that we're asking is, has your organization incorporated racial equity goals into your organizational goals, right? Is this a one-off, or is this embedded so much so into the work that you're doing that it becomes about your mission and your vision, right? Is it in your halls and your walls and the way you walk and talk it, right? In the community? What disparities will this project decrease, or what equity outcomes will this project increase? Racial equity is more than like closing gaps, right? It's more than that. It's about systemic work, but a way that we can measure it, right? The way that we can measure our collective impact is that when we see those outcomes begin to shift the data, right? And that's not something that's going to happen overnight. But if we all have laser-like focus in various areas where we know disparities lie within our community, then we can together shift it. That's a part of that overall collective that it takes everyone to make this work happen. So we want to know what you're decreasing or what you're increasing in reference to some disparities, and particularly with this ARPA project, because the government certainly understood that ARPA has impacted everyone. COVID has impacted everyone, yes, but some were impacted more than others, right? Some dealt with burdens in a way that were far more detrimental, right, to their well-being. And so we recognize that. They recognize that, so we recognize that. And so we ask you to recognize that, right? It's just this trickle domino. How are you connected to those you will serve? And again, Sarah read that, so I won't speak on that, but there's this mantra, nothing about us without us, right? So that if you are doing this work, that you have connections. Community engagement is a huge portion of our racial equity plan. So are you connected to those folks that you're going to be serving? Are you connected to those priority and target populations that ARPA has laid out, that the long range recovery plan has laid out, and also that of the Reimagining Community Safety Task Force? So that's kind of sort of where you see those equity assumptions that we build our work on, and how you're seeing those play out in the application as well. Next slide, please. A little bit more about that when we talk about like accountability, right? So for those of you all who have been in nonprofit world for a while, very early on, it was like, oh, you have a great idea? We've got grant money. Write us up an application. here's your grant money, right? And it wasn't as well connected to the disparities that we see and the problems that we see. It wasn't, if you just had a good, wonderful idea, and it could probably be funded, right? So what we want to do, the prevailing thought is that we get away from some of that thinking, right? That we target our dollars collectively towards some of the challenges in our community. And so we think through that through the lens of accountability. So when we think about population accountability, as I said earlier, COVID impacted everyone, right? It was worldwide, right? It impacted everyone. So we think about the well-being of our entire population in an area. So we think, they've thought about how did Americans fare? How did people in Orange County fare, right? So we think about all of that, but it's bigger than just one program or agency that can make this work, right? It is keeping an eye on how is everyone doing, but then realizing that some folks are not where everyone is. And this is not about bringing people down a level, but it's about bringing folks up. And while raising the standard for everyone. Kind of want to make that clear. So in the middle here, you see, which is not very clear to see, and I do apologize for that. All of this information is in your guidance documents or within your applications. And it just speaks to where we see folks that have struggled, right, based on the pandemic. It's about the priorities that our town council has set, the priorities of ARPA. And so we're just asking you to be accountable to who's not doing well in the community, to claim that, to say that, right? Performance accountability, and we see that down on that trickle from who's doing well in the community. We've identified who's not doing so well, right? And so now when it comes to performance accountability, we want to figure out, how is the performance of your agency, your program, or the system really going to drill down to the folks who need it the most, right? How is your program, your actions, how are they going to change the well-being of a particular client population, right? So you can look at it, front or back. We want to make sure that we are on target, and the folks who have been targeted are going to be better because of the work that we're doing together.
Shanika, this is your reminder to answer the question from the chat.
Absolutely, thank you so very much. And so earlier in the chat, let me go back. I think I was here. There was a question around, Riri had a question, and I think and make sure that I say that right. Can you pronounce your name so that I don't say it incorrectly?
You said it correctly. It's Riri.
Okay, and say your last name.
Way.
Okay, want to make sure I thank you. Riri Way. Had a question about 4B, and it's talking about the long-term recovery plan and what best fits your category. And I see that you're serving refugees from Burma. The reason why you see two particular races or ethnicities listed there is because in the long-term recovery plan, what they did is explicitly state from the data that they received and the research who was most impacted, right? So within those categories, there are others that are non-race related, but there's a part of doing this racial equity work that we really want to be race explicit. So when we see it and we know a thing, we say it. Right. And so what you see in that in 4B is just the explicit stating of the data that we received in terms of folks who were most impacted. So I'm not gonna say it was intentionally left out, it was intentionally cropped from that long range recovery plan in those categories. But does not mean that you, if there are other places where that fits, certainly share about the population in which you're going to serve.
Yeah, I want to reiterate that. So there was not an intention to leave anyone out specifically, but like Shanika said, the data showed them certain things, but the people that you serve, regardless of nationality or ethnicity, race, could have been impacted in different ways that also are covered here. So maybe they experienced unemployment, increased food insecurity, increased housing insecurity. So they probably fall under other categories that aren't explicitly stated because of the data. And I'm wondering if the data wasn't there because it maybe wasn't an option on the forms that they used, but we could speculate that all day probably. Thank you, Shanika.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that. Of course, we always have struggles with our data, but we're working on that too from a One Orange standpoint. We're trying. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so when we think about our plan and the work that we're doing, can people see? I saw something in the chat about can we enlarge it a bit, and I don't know if that was during my portion. And
Unfortunately, I can't enlarge it. This is how big it is because I'm just sharing like an entire screen. But I will say this will be on the website afterwards. So if you really like a certain slide or something, you can go find it and blow it up later. So I'm sorry, some of the things are kind of small, but we'll make sure it's available to you.
And they were just there to pull your reference from what we're asking for and where it sits on the application. So if you've seen the application, none of this is new information. What I wanted to do was pull out a little bit when we talk about these priorities. One of the things I think that's most challenging about this process is thinking about all of the things that we want to cover, right? In this ARPA project, we have, this nice pot of money, and though in grant world and, major systemic change, it's not a lot of money. But when it's a random drop of money, it's a lot of money, right? So we've got this nice pot of money and this opportunity to make changes. And so we've got those top priorities that are given by our council. And we want you to think about those things, right? We've got that COVID impacted piece. Think about those pieces. Look at that Orange County long-term recovery plan, add that in, right? Think about that as well. Think about the Reimagining Community Safety Task Force and those recommendations, add that in. And we want you to sit with that, meld that over, and think through how can your project address a good amount. We don't want you to throw everything in there but the kitchen sink, but really think through it. There's a lot of overlap. Right? When you're familiar with the population, there's a lot of overlap. So we want you to think through what does that look like? And when you think through your problem and your project and you begin to describe it, what problem do you want your program to solve? What need are you going to meet? And we've got 4 major needs up there, right? We've got 4 needs that have been identified in many of these instances, with the exception of the COVID impacted, which was given to us by the folks who also gave us the money, right? So we've got their accountability, but the rest of them are really community generated sources, right? This crowdsourced from the community, right? About the hurt areas and the pain points in our community. And so we've just not come up with this list. This is community generated with some community engagement. So what better way than to take a tragedy that claimed the lives of so many people and kept us inside, even though we're outside now, right? And turn it into a way to make our community stronger, more resilient in the back end of that. So we just kind of want you to think through, how do you put that together? Just pour all of that in a pot, and what's reduced out should be some type of problem statement for you, right? The thing that you're going to solve. And it's so hard. I can't see can you go camera on? I love to facilitate. I need head nods. If you can, is this making sense for you? I need feedback in my life. Okay. Is this, okay, we're making sense here? Okay. All right. And if it's not, keep your cameras on for just a little bit. It's the facilitator in me. I need to see your faces. Okay, next slide. All right, so furthermore, wanted to break out a little bit of this reimagining community safety, right? Breaking this out, not because it has extra priority, right? But breaking it out because there are several recommendations here, and not that this is not in alignment, but there are several things that are really internal to the town of Chapel Hill, internal to the police department. So we don't want you to start thinking about all of these categories that you're going to fix, because it's not really aligned, right? So the areas that are most aligned is the prevention, the crisis, and the post-crisis. And then we've pulled those out for you to see here, right? So there's, again, you see that affordable housing, the diversion and deflection, expanding community police conversations, some mental health pieces, some expanded street outreach. So you can see from a prevention standpoint, the areas that really are like rising to the top as some community priorities. Alcohol and youth, and you'll see that also in that slide that Sarah showed you earlier, around behavioral health and mental health and housing. So the overlap is there, right? So when you have a federal guideline that tells you some of the struggles, you've got community generated pieces that are telling you some of the struggles. We're there, right? It's all there. And then from a post-crisis standpoint, thinking through support for persons who are formerly in the criminal justice system. So we wanted to just pull out, isolate, and highlight for you some of the areas of the Reimagining Community Safety Task Force recommendations that are most applicable to this process. I don't want you to try to come up with a new 911 system, right? We'll try to pull those dollars from somewhere else. So don't go so wide there in your thinking. But if you have thoughts on that, I'm sure Chief would love to hear those. Let's see, and we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so getting to results. So a part of this GARE, Government Alliance on Race and Equity, again, comes back to that accountability. That conversation I had about population accountability and performance accountability is really the thinking and the beginning of this results-based accountability framework. Anyone in the public health, has anyone heard of the results-based accountability? Have you, again, that's that feedback in me that I'm asking for. If you're familiar with that term, you may or may not be, and that's okay if you're not. We're going to have some training that will be available for our community partners just as we begin to kind of roll this out a little bit more. A results-based accountability framework is a framework that just asks, in general, 3 questions, right? It really wants to know, how much did we do? How well do we do it? And is anyone better off? So it's not a brand new way of thinking, right? When we think about performance measures or logic models, it just calls it out in a very specific way. So we don't have to throw away logic models. We just need to kind of think through where we can find the answers to those 3 very legitimate questions, right? So in the slide earlier, I showed you the reduction of like that problem statement. So that kind of answers question number 6 for us. And then on question number 12, or application question number 12, we're asking you to really logically think through your program, right? When you think about your inputs, what's the stuff, right? People, places, and things that you need to make your program work, right? Again, don't tell me pens unless your job is to teach someone how to hold a pen, right? Like, unless you're doing like penmanship, right? So big level, big ticket items that it takes for you to run your program. Activities, what are you going to do? What are the strategies that you're going to use to make your program work? These things, right? If you think about it, they should be action words that you can put an ing on, right? They're verbs. These are verbs that you're going to do to make this program work. Pretty much like this thought process. If I have this, then I can do this, right? The next thought process in the logic model is, if I have these things, then I can do this. And if I do this, right, with X amount of people for this long, that's my output, right? The output is almost like the recipe, if you will, right? I need a half a cup of this and I need to bake it for this long, right? So you're thinking through, what is the prescription? What is the formula that will get you to the next category, which will be your outcome, right? The benefits and the changes that you will see in the lives of your participants, right? So if I have staff time and books and certified teachers and pens and paper, right? All the things it would take to maybe do an after-school tutoring program, right? And you hold in-school or in-person tutoring sessions with young people, and you have 25 kids and they receive 1 hour per week, right? For 12 weeks for the first 6 months of the program. If you do all of that stuff, you want to see students reading at or above grade level. That's your thought. That is your belief. Now, the thing that's important in this process is that you have to identify, when it comes to an outcome, how you're going to measure it, right? In some instances, you can go on self-report, right? A survey. But in some instances, there are better measures, right? So you can ask kid, how many of you all have worked with young people, kiddos, and you say, well, how's school? And they say, good, right? Like, we're not looking for that measurement, right? We need something a little bit more prescriptive. And so are there tests? Are you working with a partner? Have you partnered with the school and they're going to give you access to their grades? You know, are you using a standardized test that you're going to administer to the young folks every, the program's 12 weeks, every 4 weeks, right? To benchmark how well they're doing. We want you to think through logically how you're going to make this work. And so again, the facilitator in me is looking for understanding. And there's some little things at the bottom, like a thumbs up, or if you're like, Shanika, we've been doing this for a long time, I know, move on, right? We just want to make sure that folks are clear and good about what it is that we're asking them to do, because we're going to rate you on it, right? So we want you to be logical so that we can logically follow your train of thought on that. Thank you for the hands and the thumbs up that were given. Okay, next. All right, so I love when it is logically there, because I was talking about scoring, and so on to scoring as a nice segue here. The overall scoring, again, from accountability standpoint, we have to hold ourselves to a level of accountability, right? So we've got this scoring mechanisms that kind of help us make good sense of what it is that we're doing, and what you're doing, so that we can feel good that we've been good stewards over this money, and then good stewards of community well-being in the areas in which we've been tasked to kind of look at. So there's kind of two sections, and Sarah, feel free to jump in here, but there's two levels of review that your applications will go over or will undergo. ARPA eligibility, if your program is not ARPA eligible, like, you're going to get a 0, right? And if it really is extremely eligible, right, then you get a 4, and it's really clear. So as long as you can answer, you can give yourself an overall score, right? Is it specific to pandemic relief? If it's just a good idea and you're like, I'm just going to do it anyway, because I really think this is a good idea, and if they read it, they're going to love it and they're going to fund it, right? If it's like one of those thoughts, then you probably might get a 0 on that piece. But if you've thought through the pandemic relief and the 4 categories that are kind of pouring into that problem statement that you're going to write, and it's specific to that pandemic relief, and it's laser-like focused on that, then you're probably looking at a 4. In the middle, you're probably looking at a 2. Does it meet equity goals? Again, we've sent, a lot of times we talk equity, but like, we put that thing on paper this time, and I'm excited about that. So
that's next.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going to talk about the equity scorecard in a second, because this is the overall piece, and then that is pulled out a bit, right? We really elevated it. But we're going to give you this equity piece. Do you have a score on the equity scorecard? Is it lower, in the middle, or high, right? So, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then there's a community review team, and they're going to be asking additional questions, right? So this is the community review team, where we have folks who, many of which maybe helped and sat on the long-term recovery plan, or they may be a part of the community in other ways, or maybe they sat on the Reimagining Community Safety Task Force. Who knows? People are coming from various places to kind of help with this community review team. And so they're asking if it benefits the qualified census tract, right? Because we asked you that question earlier. And so if you answer that truthfully, then, if you're on point, you got that at level 4. Benefits affected communities. Again, if it's there, it's there. Cross-organization collaboration. Council said we want folks to not, work in isolation. These are bigger dollars, bigger than we really ever get a chance to give out. So let's do something transformative in our community. Connections to targeted community. Are you connected or are you not connected, right? Do you have relationships, or is this the opportunity that you're taking to get familiar with the community? And then success measurability. Can we look at your logic model? Can we read your application and clearly see what it is that you intend to do and how you will measure it? Right? Have you thought, is that thing making sense? Right? Is it logical? So that's the overall scoring one. And if we can go to the next one. Onto the equity scorecard. And I will apologize up front. This is a wordy slide, but I promise to kind of try to go through it in a way that just gives you a really good overview. So when we think about equity, there's various things that we want to think through. With any program, right? You have to answer, let me orient you to the slide. So we've got our categories, right? The what and the how, the why and the who, right? So we have our definitions, limitations, and project score that kind of goes off to the right there. So with any program, with anything, you want to make sure it's effective. You want to make sure it's efficient. You want to make sure you can do it. Like that's like pretty standard with, you know, in life, right? You want to do it well, you want to be efficient in it, and you want to be able to do it with the resources that you have. So for each of these categories, we've given them a weight of 6 based on your response to the, you know, based on what we see and how we read your application, right? If your program appears logically to be effective, then we'll give you a score. If it's really effective, 3, 2, or 1. If you're using best practices, if you're using national approaches, right? If you've got this out of the box thing that just really makes sense, you'll get a score for that. And so then we would take your score, whatever that might be. If it's really high and you get a 3, and effectiveness is weighted at a 6, we would multiply 3 times 6. And so for effectiveness, you would get a score of 18, right? When it comes to efficiency, oftentimes with grants or, you know, with various things, are we going to get a good bang for our buck, right? Is your program so expensive because it's amazing, but you only serve 6 people, right? So again, us being accountable to these dollars, right? How, and there's multiple grants that we'll look through, which grants are going to give us the most return, right? How efficient, how much, you know, benefit will we get from the dollars that we're going to impart? From an administrative feasibility standpoint, do you have the bandwidth, to carry this program out? Right? Like, so if, you know, I can't write a grant to be, you know, a surgeon, I'm not a surgeon, or therapy. Like I know trauma, but I'm not a therapist. I don't have the administrative feasibility to carry that out. So really make sure that what you're writing is within your wheelhouse to do, that you have the resources. Again, that comes down to that input section of the logic model, right? Do you have the inputs to carry out the activities that will then give you the outputs that would then give you the outcomes, right? Do you have the technology needed? And there may be some, in some instances and spaces, and Amy, this is a question for you, where there may be resources that you have in-house and some resources that you'll have to buy, right? That you'll have to purchase. I heard you talking about this reimbursement agreement, that it couldn't be the partitions from back in 2020, have to be something that you would buy during this particular section. So there is room for you to be able to purchase things, right? As you carry out this grant, but just think through what it is that you have and what you're going to need in order to make this thing work. Then we kind of get to these external pieces, right? Strategically, is it feasible, right? Based on what it is that we've given you as important things, are you on target on that? Does your project program fit with the strategic goals and missions of the ARPA grant process, right? Are you on point with that? If you are, if you're in the middle, if you're kind of low, again, you get a score. Socially acceptable. When we think about that, we're thinking through the extent to which the stakeholders will accept and support the proposed policy. That goes back to that piece of, are you connected to the community in which you're serving, right? To a point where what you've proposed has almost been vetted with the folks who are going to, you know, receive it, right? Oftentimes, people who write grants in the past in Anytown USA will come up with this wonderful idea about how they're going to serve the community and in essence save them, right? But they missed the part of talking to the community most impacted and having them help create solutions. And so it was a great project and it was logical, but it really didn't work. So again, we're kind of looking at your ability to gather and demonstrate some community input on your project. That it didn't just happen in a think tank vacuum. So then we get to, oh, there's someone that needs to be admitted. And then we get to the WHO section, the populations impacted, right? So the liberty and equity. If you notice, those are at an 8. And those are at an 8 because we elevated them. Again, we are serious about the fact that we want to have equity be centered in this process. So we're thinking through, when it comes to liberty, are we expanding the liberty, right? And the rights and choices of individuals who have been marginalized? In some instances, you may be expanding or restricting everyone, right? Not every program will impact everyone. And then on the lower end, are you restricting marginalized populations, right? So we want to make sure that when you think through your project, are you helping or hurting, right, folks? When it comes to equity, we want to think through, are you reducing disparities? Are you increasing disparities? Are you moderately increasing disparities? Again, there may be some instances and programs and projects that for the good of all, everyone has to, kind of pay a tax on something, right? But again, that just depends on the way your project is set up. But we're hoping, especially with this ARPA dollars, that you're going to reduce some disparities, right? That's what we're hoping that you do. And so that's the equity scorecard, and that's a mouthful there. It's a mouthful, but it's logical, right? The things that we've asked you, we're looking for, right? The things that we've asked you in this application will be reflected in the way in which your grant is scored. And I think that's my last one. And I promise you will, and so we did give you those top priorities, again, because it begins with what you put in the funnel. You'll have this just for your view, your perusal at a later date. But there's nothing really new on that, so we can move to the next. And thank you all. I think that concludes, summary.
Thank you so much, Shanika. I always learn something when I listen to you talk about this, and may have been taking notes for my own self. So that is the end of kind of our content. The last couple slides I have here is just kind of a really brief, and Shanika already covered some of this, but just giving you a sneak peek at what the review process will look like. As she mentioned, town staff, we're going to look at some of the nuts and bolts. Is it ARPA eligible? Does it meet town council interests? Does a project meet our equity goals? We'll be doing that equity score sheet that Shanika just walked you through. Our community team will review kind of the general merit of the project, whether the project benefits qualified census tracts and or the most affected people in our community, whether your application reflects collaboration and connection to the target community, and how you will be measuring the impact of your program. Right now, we have an amazing 20 People's Academy graduates that have volunteered to look at applications. I'm sure some of those will drop out when we get closer to the application process, but we have a really good group, and we might be looking at other people as reviewers, like Shanika mentioned, to be looking at this and thinking about whether kind of scoring the projects based on our scoring rubric. So that's basically how the project will be scored. We wanted to let you guys know up front, so it wasn't a surprise who will be looking at your applications. And then here's a schedule of what's next. So you may have seen on our website that we're going to have additional office hours. So if we're not able to answer your questions today, or if you come up with new questions after today, you can join any of our office hours. They'll be just like this. They'll be on Zoom, only they'll be much less structured. I'll just be there and available to answer your questions. We can workshop a question that you have, or like a suggestion that you have, and we can talk about ARPA eligibility or whatever else you're unsure about around the application. So that'll just be one-on-one time, or I should say, me being available to any of you with questions you might have. If there's anything I can't answer, I will bring that back to the team or get back to you on it. As I mentioned a couple times, your questions are due by next Friday, the 22nd, by 5 p.m. After which me and Amy will not be available to answer your questions because we'll be out of the office. I know that's not ideal, but the trade-off is that you get an extra week instead of making the actual deadline next Friday. We wanted to give you guys an extra week to think about it. Then, like I said, August will be in review time. Don't call us, we'll call you if we need more information. And then we'll be presenting all of the projects that we've received that are eligible to town council in September. In October, we anticipate that taking multiple meetings. They often need to kind of digest things over multiple meetings. So that's why you see 2 different months for town council to look at your projects. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see all your lovely faces, and I will open it to question and answer. Just a reminder that I'm still recording, but if you have a question that you would like to not be recorded, you can either type it in the chat, email me individually at arpa@townofchapelhill.org, or you can ask it at the very end and I can turn off the recording. So that is where we are right now. We've finished a lot earlier than I thought I was. I'm very excited. Probably because I talk so fast, as was mentioned in the chat. Sorry. So what questions do you have? I'd love if you raised your hands. That'd be helpful for me to make sure I'm catching everybody that has a question. So, Tanya?
Hi, so I'm Tanya Day, and I'm the new grants manager at the Kidzu Children's Museum.
Oh.
And I'm sorry if I'm asking very silly questions. The first is, you said that the questions are due by July 22nd. That's just any additional questions that we may have after attending the office hours.
You got it. Yeah. Basically, so what happened with the letter of intent process is that we had a month, it was open for a month, and then I was getting questions until about 4:35, the day that it was due, which is probably pretty standard for grant applications. But I don't want you guys to get to the last second and still have questions, especially because me and Amy will be at the office. So that's the idea. Yeah. And I'll put up some kind of out of office on the email to remind people that you can submit your application to the email box, but no one will be actively checking it that last week of July.
And you talked about how if we were giving our funds to somebody else, we would have another sort of sub. Would that count as like contractors coming in and creating something for us? Any fabrication?
Good question, Amy. I think it's $50,000, right? Is the threshold?
Yeah. So it would not. It's not someone you're paying to do something. It's if you are contracting with someone else to like actually run the program. So very different to just pay someone to buy something from someone or to pay a contractor. That's not what we're talking about. We're really talking about if you are subbing out and really they're going to be doing the management of the program, you're just kind of facilitating it. So it's a great question, but no, you're certainly able to pay people to do things. It's just it's tied back to the management of the program.
Okay, that makes sense. And then my last question is, you had mentioned something about earned program income, and the initiative that we really like to focus on with this does have to do with accessibility, which is an overall sort of program for the museum, and we charge ticket sales. Is that?
Yeah, I think I see what you mean.
Enter.
So this is specifically, so the example they gave is, say you were using ARPA funds for a town project that was to buy a bunch of canoes that you're then going to rent out as part of like a park program. So you're buying something that you're then going to make money off of. That is like an earned income. That is kind of the example. So if your agency just happens to charge fees for various things that you do, and you're looking at some program that supports your general agency, that's not earned income of the service that you're getting ARPA funds for. Amy, did I capture that? Okay. They're pretty specific about earned income. There's a lot of yeah, I could bore you with other things that ARPA would like to tell you about earned income, but essentially if you earn income, you have to like give it back to them. And well, that's a bad blanket statement to use. We would just like to know if anybody's planning to do that, and that'll help us kind of plan accordingly. It doesn't mean that your program is like less competitive than some other program. It just means that there's some extra things we'll have to, extra I's to dot and T's to cross.
Okay. And then I suppose all of the documents that you showed us, including the example one, they're all available on the website now, or will they be available soon?
So the only thing that's not available on the website now, okay, hold on a second, is the reporting document that Amy walked you through. We literally finished that this morning. I will put it up at the end of the day. And then I'm hoping to give you guys a sample performance agreement, which is basically the contract that you'll sign. I'm kind of struggling on putting together one that people are comfortable with me using. So I'm hoping to have that really soon. So keep checking back on the website, but the equity scorecard, overall scorecard, application, guidance, logic model, and reporting are all there or will be by the end of the day.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for your questions. I have a couple questions in the chat and I don't see any hands raised. So I'll go ahead and jump into the chat real quick and answer those. Where'd my chat go? There you are. Okay, so just gonna start at the top with Karen. Earned income. Is Medicaid a state reimbursement considered earned income? That is a great question. Amy and I don't know if you know at the top of your head, but I don't. And I think we might need to look into it.
I don't know. I think we'll have to follow. I don't think so, but I think we need to confirm that.
So great question. You stumped the facilitators. Good job for ARPA. Okay, so I'm writing that down for later. Sorry, Karen, I don't have a question or an answer for you. Can ARPA funds be used to purchase food to distribute to communities in need? Yeah, that it would be a legitimate use of your ARPA funds. Like if you run a food bank, absolutely. We've gotten a couple letters of intent for that, and I think we deemed all of them as eligible. So that is definitely something that's eligible. I see that Shanika responded, if you didn't submit a letter of intent, you can still apply. If you see on the website and in the email that I sent out, if you did not submit a letter of intent, you need to come to one of the office hours or contact me outside of office hours so that we can ensure that your project that you want to submit is ARPA eligible. And my only interest there is to make sure you don't spend a lot of time doing an application about a project that's not eligible. That's all. I just don't want you to waste your time. So just get in touch with me. All right, Karen had another question. Referencing households, is that defined as the population group individuals we are working with? Karen, are you still here? I don't, oh, there you are. Karen, could you maybe clarify your question?
I would have to go back to the application, but it, I think it was framed as, one of the priorities is working with households that are very low income or X, Y, or Z. Does that mean, does that mean that individuals that we're working directly with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I use household as kind of a proxy for people, because the ARPA really likes to use household. Like if your household is in a QCT, or if your household is low income, or your household is eligible for this benefit. And then you'll see in the Orange County long-term recovery plan, they really think about individuals. So you'll see their language is a little more individuals that experience this, individuals that experience that. So it's kind of just an ARPA thing, but it just really refers to like who. And then some people I've also seen like to report on how many households they've served. Like food banks will say, we gave away 100 boxes of food today, so we served 100 households. So I just kind of left it there as like an option for you, depending on how you define who you serve. It might be individuals, might be households. Great. Ginny, so Ginny had a question about how funding will be awarded. And you asked me this in email, and it's a great question. I don't have a great answer for you, but thinking about the scope of what council is looking for. So about 50 projects that are between $50,000 and $1 million. Now, if your agency has $1 million project, is it eligible? Does it meet the criteria? Yes. However, council hasn't told us they want to fund 5 things or 2 things or 1 thing or 10 things. They've just said that we don't want to see projects that are little, and we don't want to see really big things. So I can't really tell you that $1 million project is going to be less competitive than a $50,000 project, but do keep in mind that lots of people are applying. So that's kind of the only guidance I can give you. Amy or Shanika, would you say that any differently based on your knowledge of the
No, I mean, I think that's right. And the only thing I will add is that, you know, the frame, the $1 million is really a framework right now. The slide that Sarah showed is, you know, we needed to put something before council to just gauge how they felt about, you know, how much money they wanted to see in the various buckets. So there is potential flexibility for a little bit, right? If there's a project that council's really excited about, that we can certainly think differently about this allocation. It was really just for the right now. So I would say just think about that council will want to see a project that's large enough that the 50,000 was just so that you could actually see some kind of outcome. And I'm sure they'll want to see more than just one project actually being accomplished. So that's kind of the framework. But there is potentially a little bit of flexibility.
And I would say, think through the transformation that your project is going to have on the community, right? So also with grants, and so this is a very time limited grant, right? So December 2024, am I correct on that? All dollars dispersed and things done, or maybe not all dollars dispersed, but all services rendered.
Yeah.
And so how impactful is your program going to be beyond that? Like, how much change can you give this community in that amount of time?
Well, and speaking of the award period, you need to be able to spend all of it by December 31st, 2024. So if you're a small nonprofit, getting $1 million could take a while to spend, or maybe it doesn't, depending on what you're doing. Yeah.
But think about that impact. Think about the ripple, right? So council's going to look at that as well. How much impact will this have now and in the future, right? So go, you know, get deep with it.
There's 2 more questions in the chat. One will be quick because I think we've kind of already talked about it, and one will be a little different. So Jenny also asked any insights on how funds will be awarded. We kind of just talked about that. I can't look into a crystal ball and tell you council's going to really want to see this type of project or this type of project. I've given you what council has said so far, you know, size of project, big, bold, new ideas, or helping people most disadvantaged by the pandemic. Our scoring, both the equity score and the overall score, are just meant to guide council. They are the final decision makers. So neither Amy, myself, or Shanika are the people that are going to tell council fund this or fund that. It's merely going to be part of their decision making. They are the final deciders on what gets funded. So it's really hard to tell you much more than that. And then Karen had one more question. Individuals we work with are almost all very low income. Are the individuals we're working with considered a disadvantaged community? Yeah, they fall into one of those categories that's captured in both the long range recovery plan and the ARPA categories. So yeah, I would check as many boxes in that question that you think apply to the people that you serve, especially if everybody you serve falls into that category. So that is the questions from the chat. I see Ari and Dolores both have a question. Ari, I think I saw yours first, but you guys can fight it out if you want. Who wants to go first?
I think Dolores had hers up first.
All right, Dolores, you're first. Unless you're in the middle of something, then we can come back to you.
Either way, thank you, Ari. I have a couple of questions. One, are we allowed to submit multiple applications?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, you are. Yeah, multiple applications for multiple services. That's a question I got over email a couple times. Is what constitutes a separate service? Mm-hmm. And we can talk about that if that's a question that you have. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then the other thing is if we've got a program that lasts over a couple of years, can we ask for funding over those multiple years? Is that what, like, if we know we've got a program that's already there, it fits into Shaniqua's category, and we're asking for funding for it for 2 years, is that how we do that?
You're going to apply for all your funding up front. So that'll be for calendar year 2023 and calendar year 2024. You're going to apply for it all up front. And a couple of thoughts there. One is that the deadline is set by ARPA. We don't have any control over that. We're going to get you the money as quickly as possible. But as you know, Dolores especially, and others on this call probably as well, it takes us a little time to get money in your hands. Yeah. So you'll apply for everything you want for those whole 2 years all at one time.
Okay, so let me make sure I'm clear about this. We can't spend the money first, or we can spend the money and expect the reimbursement?
Well, actually, you have to spend the money first and get reimbursement. Everything the town does by state statute, we cannot pay for something that has not occurred. And you can only get reimbursed for things that occur after you've signed your performance agreement and as part of what you've agreed to under your performance agreement. So for example, if you need to buy a projector today to carry out a program, you cannot in January ask us to reimburse you for it because we haven't signed your agreement.
Okay, and now one last question I have. You know, we're housing providers and we're asking for big dollars for an upcoming project. You're telling us not to apply in this particular way, but go right now to housing reserve money? Or wait until the cycle of housing reserve?
Not necessarily. So if you are applying for money to construct new affordable housing units, or I believe to preserve existing affordable housing units, that is going through the town's common funding application, is I believe what they call it. That's what they told me to call it. And that'll be one application process for ARPA dollars for affordable housing, for Affordable Housing Development Reserve Fund dollars for affordable housing, and bond money. So that's all the money we have for construction of new affordable housing units that'll be available this year. ARPA is part of that. The town has $2.5 million we've kind of set aside specifically for affordable housing out of ARPA. And so the Affordable Housing Community Connections team will accept applications from everybody that wants to construct new units and then decide which pot of money makes the most sense for each of it, but that's not your problem, that's our problem.
And are we applying for it now?
I believe the application will be open at the end of the month.
Okay.
So that'll all come right from Nate Broman Fox and Emily Holt.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
But totally separate from this. Yeah. So you don't need to do our application also, just the other one. And Ari, now it's your turn.
Great. I have two questions. One is related to the last question Dolores just asked, which is not about new construction, but homeless services is also in that other pot of money. So that's the other application, or that's this application, and then you decide which pool.
You got it.
Okay.
The second one. So that other one is really just for the construction of new units. If you have something that's kind of housing related, but not constructing new units, this is the process for you. We will decide which bucket of money makes the most sense.
Okay. And then my second question, I think might also be a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it just to make sure I understand, which is about existing programs versus a new innovative program. If we have done this program before, but not in Chapel Hill, that's considered a new program for the purposes of this, or that's an existing program?
In my mind, I see that as new because it's never been provided in Chapel Hill, and it's not something that you like stopped because of the pandemic or you had to adjust because of the pandemic. But I would definitely include the fact that you've done it other places in your project statement, in your kind of in that question number 2 on the first page, and say like, we've done it other places, we want to expand to Chapel Hill. This will be the first time that we've done it. Amy or Shanika, do you have different advice on that?
No.
No. And then related to that question, if it's a new program that we're starting it before January 2023, I understand we can't ask for money until 2023. Is then it an existing program? Like we haven't started it yet, but we are going to start it before the funding period.
That's a great question. I would still kind of consider that in the new category because you haven't been doing it the last 2 years, for example, but you could certainly only apply for like your funding request should only include things you want the town to help reimburse you for during the award period.
Correct. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of the interest that council had between the two different types of projects. I think their interest was if there's a nonprofit that's just struggling, but they're providing a really important program, could we help them like continue to operate at a higher level because of the COVID needs? Or could we do something that's totally new and different? And I think you would just make sure you fill out that budget that says, are you applying for funds other places? You can say like, oh, our startup money is coming from here, but we need money to continue it or whatever it happens to be. So tell that story there.
Thanks.
And similarly, like it looks like we just got a question in the chat about reimbursements. Yes, it's quarterly. So I think Amy talked about this briefly, but so say that your performance agreement is signed and sealed, delivered, and January 1st, you're allowed to start submitting, your performance agreement's effective January 1st. You could apply for your reimbursement April 15th. So every quarter you need to submit your reporting and your reimbursement, and then we cut you a check for the approved expenses that you submitted. And then Karen's asked if sounds as though higher numbers are better in terms of total project spend. Is that accurate, Karen? And then the work we are doing is very comprehensive. The needs are great for our folks. Therefore, we aren't directly serving large numbers of people. Is our type of work considered? Yeah, I mean, I think I would not focus on how many people you're serving, but those goals and gaps and problems that Shanika talked a lot about, more than the number of people you're serving, I think would be just as impactful.
Right.
Yeah.
And because it's not like we're serving directly 1,000 people, you know, it's more like 100 directly. But then, of course, we're impacting lots of different entities in the community, the police, the courts, the hospital,
yeah,
you know, our businesses.
Yeah, I think that impact is exactly what Shanika was getting at, is like, are you addressing a gap, a problem, an issue in our community, even if it's not 1,000 people? And I don't think most projects that we got letters of intent about had anything to do with 4 digits of people, 1,000 people. It was mostly, you know, a little smaller number of people, but a big impact. I think I've answered all the questions in the chat. Checking to see if anybody else has a hand raised.
And Karen, I just want to, you know, when I was saying that, it's the impact and you look at the severity of an issue, right? So when you look at the severity and the compounded needs of particular groups and what you're doing to serve them and pull them to a level of well-being, I think that looks different. If we're talking about super small numbers and it is, you know, a backpack giveaway, like what do we put in the backpack, right? MacBooks, you know, like, so it's that, right?
Yeah,
If
it's totally different.
Way, right? If somebody has that thought process, I wasn't, you know, poo-pooing on your idea, but, you know, just wanting you to think broadly about the impact on the region.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. And thank you, Shanika, because I was like, literally need to sneeze as you came on. The joys of Zoom. Other questions? These have been just great ones.
Was this helpful?
Oh,
I'm a feedback person. You know, like, you know me.
I should put up a poll and be like, you can do it anonymously. Helpful, not helpful. Okay, I'm getting some thumbs up. Fantastic. Hopefully it came through today that we really want you guys to be successful. We want your applications to be complete first time. We want to learn more about what you want to do, and thus have the best chance of putting a really great set of projects in front of council in September and October. You know, like, success for me in my job as a special project manager is to give them a bunch of projects that are ARPA eligible with all the information they need to make a decision, so that we can go through quickly and get you guys working as soon as possible. So the more you can help us on the front end by completing your applications accurately and completely, the better we can represent your projects as we go through the scoring process and through the council process. So that's my little pitch and my stalling to see if anybody else has a question before we sign off. Awesome. Well, after today, I will put the recording of the training up on the website. I'll put the PowerPoint up on the website. I'll put the reporting document that Amy went through up on the website. So you will have, oh, thank you, Ray. Even if I was talking fast. So you will have everything that we talked about today, even though a lot of it's a review from your guidance and your application, you'll have it in yet another format. Please come to the office hours if you have follow-up questions. So I might see some of you on Wednesday at noon. If you want to come hang out with me yet again at office hours, I would treasure that, of course. All right, last chance, or we're shutting down the meeting and turning off the recording. Awesome. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for doing what you do. We see you, we appreciate you. And I hope to see your applications on the 29th, or when I get to the office on the 1st. Let's be honest. All right, you guys have a great one. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna end the recording.